Okay, we talked about snapping into the square in the video number 49. So what we learned from that video is that if, in this case, if black is able to step into the square of the pawn, then it'll be able, of course, when the pawn is starting to march toward the queening square, then black will be able to capture the pawn before it queens, or at the time it queens. So as we can see from this illustration, that if white were to try to push the pawn right away, then black would be able to step into the square, and black will win. Black will draw. Okay, g4. Black moves into the square. Okay, the square of the pawn, of course, is right here. Okay, so black has to be, at this point, black must be on any of those squares, from c4 to c8 to anywhere else in this area. So this is a clear draw, because the pawn will be captured. If the pawn continues marching, then it's just going to be captured. No matter what white does, it's going to be captured. If white were to try at this point, for example, to try to run after, let's say white changes his mind and tries to protect with the king, it's not going to work either, because the king cannot get there in time. So this is, once again, no good. So this is not good for white. What white needs to do, rather, there is actually a way for white to win this game. What white needs to do is seize the opposition. Now, if white could not seize the opposition in this scenario, then it would be a draw. But it happens to be that if white moves to g4, I'm sorry, wrong. If white moves to b3, then white just currently has the opposition. So what this accomplishes is that it forces black to be, not to have the opposition when white is in front of their pawn. Why is this important? Because this is the critical moment. Now, black is forced to move to the side, to one of the sides, and now white is able to occupy a critical square. Okay, so basically the idea behind this illustration is that white cannot push the pawn right away, because black would be able to step into the square, but rather what white could accomplish is seize a critical square, which is on the 4th rank, since the pawn is still in the 2nd rank, and once white controls a critical square, white is able to promote the pawn through standard tactical procedure in this scenario. And so we've seen a lot of examples of how it works in previous videos, but in case you're not sure, it's not as simple as it seems, especially since this is a knight pawn, and so white needs to be careful, as we've seen in previous videos, but it's pretty straightforward. I mean, here white still has the opposition, and white can just, continue exploiting this opposition until black gets to the back rank. At this point, black is trying to hide in the corner and to force a draw. So at this point, it's actually safe for white to start pushing the pawn, and it doesn't really matter what black does. White just continues pushing the pawn, and at this point, white will move to, like as we've seen in the previous video, white will move into the bishop file and have control of the queening square. And now black is forced, the only legal move is to move into the rook file on the 7th rank, and now white will advance the pawn with check. Black will go into the corner, best move, and check again, and so it's going to be a win for white. Yeah, so this is just the way it's going to be. I just want to show you, like, theoretically, this is always a safe position for white. Even if it were, in our scenario, it's black's turn to act. Even if it were white's turn to act right now, it's also going to be a safe position, even though black would have theoretically the position in that in such a scenario, because white would move into h6, black would move to h8, and then white would be able to safely push the pawn. And when black moves to G8, white will push the pawn again to G7, and black will be squeezed out of the queening square into the F file. Then white will be able to occupy the H7 square and safely promote the pawn. So in this, if you're looking at this situation right now, this is a guaranteed win for white, regardless of whose turn it is to act. But in our case, it's of course black's turn to act. White has the opposition, and so now white can occupy this critical square of F7 and safely promote the pawn. So once again, what we have here is an example of two things. Number one, the appreciation of the stepping into the square rule, which basically tells white, hey, I cannot push the pawn just yet. I need to first back up the pawn with my king and control a critical square before I start advancing my pawn. So that's number one. And secondly, we learn that white is able to, through opposition, white is able to force himself into a critical square, even though he doesn't have control of the fourth rank just yet. But eventually, white is going to be able to control the fourth rank, which is a critical square for a pawn on the second rank, as we see at this point right here.